The phone vibrated on the wooden table, a low, insistent hum that seemed to eat the quiet of the room. I watched it. This little black rectangle of shattered peace. I knew who it was before I even looked. The number wasn't saved, but some part of me, some old, scarred-over part, had it memorized. It was a ghost from a life I'd boarded up and walked away from. I let it ring 3 more times. Each vibration was a tiny earthquake under my palm, which was resting flat on the table. I was in the middle of fixing a loose hinge on my kitchen cabinet, a simple, satisfying task with a clear beginning and end. This call was the opposite of that. It was a tangle of old wires and bad connections. Finally, I picked it up. I didn't say hello. Silence was its own kind of answer. "Alexei?" Her voice was a familiar melody played on a broken instrument. It was Anya. There was a breathy, false warmth to it, the kind you use on a telemarketer you're trying to get off the line, but underneath it, a thin, sharp wire of desperation. "It's me." I said nothing. The silence stretched, and I could feel her discomfort through the line. A physical thing. It was a tactic, my silence. An old one. Let the other person fill the void. They always reveal more than they mean to. I hope you're well," she started, the words brittle. "I know it's been a while." A while. That was one way to put it. A while since she'd looked at the man I was, the man frayed at the edges by a world of high-stakes, soul-crushing deals, and decided I was no longer enough. A while since she'd traded the quiet intensity of a strategist for the loud, flashy emptiness of Dmitri, the visionary entrepreneur. He was all polished shoes and loud promises, a man who built his castle on credit and charm. I had built things too, but what I built were traps for other men's castles. She never understood the difference. "I'm calling because, well, a very dear old friend is in a bit of a bind." The words were so carefully chosen, a dear old friend. Not my husband, not Dmitri. The framing was everything with her. It was always about presentation. A temporary liquidity issue. You know how these things are. I did know. I knew better than anyone. I knew that liquidity issue was corporate speak for drowning. I knew the desperate look in a man's eyes when the walls were closing in. I had caused that look in more men than I could count. "He just needs a bridge," she continued, her voice tightening. "A short-term loan to get over this hump." A significant one, of course, but with your background, I knew you would understand. I knew you'd see it as an investment in an old friendship. The audacity of it. It wasn't a request. It was an insult, wrapped in the thinnest possible layer of nostalgia. She was asking me, the man she had discarded, to bail out the man she had chosen over me. She was asking me to use the resources from the life she claimed had broken us, to fix the life she had broken us for. It was a perfect, vicious circle of disrespect. My knuckles were white where I gripped the phone. The simple weight of the screwdriver in my other hand felt grounding, real. I could see it all so clearly, Dmitri, with his panicked, sweaty brow, pushing her to make the call. "He'll listen to you, Anya. He was always soft for you." And her, swallowing her pride, because his failure was now her failure. The beautiful, glittering life was cracking, and she was turning to the foundation she had once considered crumbling and weak. She was still talking, layering on the justifications. It would mean so much. We could all have dinner sometime, catch up, for Misha's sake. And there it was, the final pathetic play, using our son's name as a bargaining chip, using the one pure thing that remained between us as a down payment for her new husband's failure. The coldness that had been gathering in my chest solidified into a single sharp point. I didn't let her finish her sentence. I didn't need to hear the number. I didn't need to hear more lies wrapped in the memory of a family that no longer existed. My voice, when it came, was flat, calm. It was the sound of a door closing, of a vault locking. It was the single simplest word in the English language, carrying the weight of every unsaid thing between us. The betrayal, the loneliness, the quiet peace I had fought so hard to win. No, Alexei. Her voice was a whisper now, a ghost of the hysterical shriek from moments before. It was dawning. The first cold trickle of understanding was seeping through the cracks of her panic. And of course, I went on, relentless in my calm, the simultaneous hostile acquisition bid for his core logistics division. A masterstroke, really, launched the moment his primary line of credit was revoked. The vultures always circle the wounded, Anya. I just had to make sure the right vulture knew where the feast was. I could hear her breathing, shallow and rapid. I imagined her clutching the phone, her knuckles white, her perfectly styled world dissolving into digital zeros and legal paperwork. "You," she stammered. "You. How?" "You called me," I said, my voice still that same unnerving monotone. "You asked to borrow money from an old friend, Anya." I paused, letting the weight of the words hang in the static between us. "You just didn't know which one I was." There was no sound for a full 5 seconds. No sob, no scream, not even a breath. It was the sound of a universe collapsing in on itself. It was the sound of her finally, truly seeing the man she had left for a gilded cage. She had seen the quiet superintendent, the man who fixed leaky faucets and took out the trash. She had never seen the strategist, the architect of ruin, who had lived inside that quiet man all along. She had mistaken my silence for emptiness. She had mistaken my peace for surrender. Then a soft click. The line went dead. I placed my phone back on the counter. It sat there, inert and silent. Outside, the rain had eased. The man with the dog was gone. The bus had pulled away. The ordinary street was quiet again. I finished my tea. It was done. The phone rang with a different tone than Anya's desperate calls or Dmitri's blustering threats. It was a clean, bureaucratic sound, the kind that doesn't ask, it informs. The caller ID showed a state agency number. I picked it up, my voice steady, a flat, calm lake after a storm. "This is Alexei." The woman on the other end identified herself as a caseworker with Child Protective Services. Her voice was professional, detached, but not unkind. She explained that their office had received a referral, prompted by a financial expose in the press, expressing concerns about the welfare of a minor, Misha, residing at the address linked to Dmitry Volkov. I didn't smile. I didn't feel triumph. I felt a profound, almost sacred sense of purpose. This was the channel. This was the door I had methodically unlocked, and now it was swinging open. She asked me to describe my relationship with Misha. I told her I was his former stepfather, that I had helped raise him from the age of 5 until his mother's remarriage 2 years ago. I used the word son, not stepson, just son. because that's what he was, in every way that mattered, in every memory I cherished of teaching him to ride a bike, of helping him with his math homework while Anya was still the woman I loved. Then she asked the crucial question. Based on your knowledge, would you say Misha's current living environment is stable and safe? I didn't need to lie. I didn't need to exaggerate. I simply had to give voice to the truth I had helped unearth. I spoke in measured, factual sentences, each one a brick laid carefully in the foundation of my case. I recounted the phone call, Misha's voice, small and fractured with tears. I repeated his words, not as a dramatic performance, but as a clinical report. He stated he was frightened. He reported witnessing intense verbal altercations between his mother and stepfather. He mentioned things being taken from the house, which, given the public financial collapse and the involvement of creditors, I interpreted as a sign of active asset seizure and profound domestic instability. I paused, letting the weight of those facts settle in the silence on the line. I could almost hear her typing, transcribing my testimony into an official record. The public record now shows, I continued, my tone still that of a respectful, concerned citizen, that Dmitry Volkov is at the center of multiple serious financial fraud investigations. His home is, by extension, a target. It is a place of legal siege, of public scandal, of immense and volatile pressure. A child should not be a spectator to that. A child should not have to live in fear of strangers coming to the door to reclaim his family's possessions. I offered no opinion on Anya or Dmitry, as people I didn't call them unfit. I simply described the environment, a house of cards in a hurricane. And Misha was trapped inside. The caseworker thanked me for my time and my candor. She said they would be opening a formal case and would be conducting a home visit. I gave her my full cooperation, my address, my phone number. I was a port in the storm I had deliberately summoned, and I made sure she knew it. The moment I hung up, I did not celebrate. I moved. Action was the only antidote to the lingering adrenaline. I picked up my personal phone and dialed my lawyer, David. He was a good man, sharp, and he had handled my divorce from Anya with a quiet efficiency I respected. "David," I said the moment he answered. "It's Alexei. I need you to file a petition for temporary emergency custody." He was silent for a beat. "Of Misha?" "Yes. The environment with Anya and Dmitry has become untenable and is now a matter of public record. I just got off the phone with CPS. I believe they will find the home situation unsafe. I want to be the alternative." I laid it out for him, the same way I had for the caseworker, the fear, the volatility, the public collapse. I was not a vengeful ex-husband. I was a concerned father figure providing a factual, documented sanctuary. "Alexei," David said, his voice cautious, "this is aggressive. Anya will fight this. She'll claim you're exploiting the situation." "I am not exploiting the situation, David," I said, my voice dropping, becoming quieter, more focused. "I am responding to it. The situation was created by Dmitry's fraud and their collective instability. My petition is a response to their actions, not an initiation of my own. Frame it that way. My home is stable. My income is documented and modest. My record is clean. I am not asking for child support. I am not seeking to punish Anya. I am asking for the boy to be placed in a safe, quiet home while the courts and CPS determine the long-term solution. That home is here." I could hear the scratch of his pen on paper. "Okay," he said. the lawyer in him seeing the clean, logical path I was carving through the emotional wreckage. The CPS call gives us a strong entry point. The public financial records provide the context. Your history with the child establishes the bond. It's a very strong position, Alexei. Surprisingly so. He didn't know the half of it. He didn't know that every piece of damning evidence, every tipped-off journalist, every pointed phone call to a creditor had been meticulously placed to create this exact, strong position. I hadn't just opened a door, I had built the entire hallway leading to it. "File the papers, David," I said, my gaze drifting to the second, smaller bedroom in my apartment, the one I had always kept ready, hoping against hope for a day like this. "I'll be waiting." I ended the call and stood there, in the silence of my apartment. The legal wheels were now turning, greased by the bed of evidence I had laid down. They were turning in my favor. For the first time in 2 years, I allowed myself to truly look at the empty room and not see a monument to loss, but a space waiting to be filled, a space for my son to come home. The quiet in this apartment is different now. It's not the silence of a man who has retreated from the world. It's the quiet of a world that has finally, mercifully, settled. 6 months. It feels like a lifetime and also like the blink of an eye. I'm sitting in my armchair, the same one I've had for years, but the view from it has fundamentally changed. Across the room, at the small dining table we bought together from a second-hand store, Misha is bent over his homework. His brow is furrowed in concentration, the tip of his tongue just visible between his lips. The light from the window catches the dust motes dancing in the air around him, and for a moment, it's the only thing moving. He's quieter than he used to be. The boisterous, sometimes reckless energy of the boy I knew is gone, sanded down by the fear and chaos of those final months in that other house. But the quiet isn't empty. It's a quiet of healing. I see it in the way his shoulders have lost their permanent hunch, in the way he can now lose himself in a math problem without constantly looking over his shoulder, waiting for the next explosion. His room, the second bedroom, is right down the hall. It's not much. A bed, a desk, a bookshelf already filling up with the fantasy novels he's devouring. But it's his. The court order granting me primary custody sits in a fireproof lockbox, a single sheet of paper that feels heavier than any corporate contract I ever signed. It wasn't a battle fought with money or influence, not really. It was fought with facts, with the cold, hard evidence of a life crumbling under the weight of its own lies. The judge saw a stable home here, a safe harbor. She saw a boy who was frightened, and a man who could offer him peace. My tablet is on the armrest. I'd been scrolling through the news earlier. A small, almost insignificant article in the business section. Dimitri's picture, looking gaunt and haunted, stared back at me. The headline was a dry recitation of legal proceedings. Multiple counts of fraud, embezzlement, the whole sordid house of cards laid bare for the world to see. The article mentioned Anya only in passing, living with a relative, her name now permanently tied to his disgrace. There was no anger left in me as I read it, no satisfaction, just a hollow sort of pity. They built their kingdom on sand, and they were so busy admiring the glittering facade they never noticed the tide coming in. I swiped the article away. There is no contact, no pleading calls, no desperate texts. The line is dead, and I prefer the silence. I look from Misha back to the window. The evening is settling over our street. A man is walking his dog, a couple is laughing, carrying grocery bags, Ordinary people living ordinary lives. This was the peace I had fought so hard to build for myself after I walked away from that other world, the world of calculated ruin and financial blood sport. For a long time, I thought that peace meant solitude. I thought it meant locking the ghost of who I used to be in a footlocker in the basement and throwing away the key. But I had to let that ghost out, just once. I had to use those old, cold tools, the encrypted files, the predatory instincts, the network of contacts who operate in the shadows of high finance, not for profit, not for power, but for protection. To build a firewall around this boy, to carve out this small, sacred space of safety. That part of my past was a weapon, and I used it like a scalpel. Not a sledgehammer, I excised the tumor that was threatening the one good thing I had left. And now it's done. The tools are back in their box. The ghost is quiet. I have no desire to ever open that locker again. The thrill I once felt in dismantling empires has been entirely replaced by the profound, grounding satisfaction of watching a child feel safe enough to do his algebra homework. Misha looks up, catching me watching him. A small, tentative smile touches his lips. "This problem is stupid," he says, his voice still soft but steady. "Probably," I agree. "But you'll figure it out." He nods, looks back down at his paper, and picks up his pencil. The quiet returns, but it's a living, breathing thing now. It's filled with the scratch of graphite, the soft hum of the refrigerator, the distant sound of traffic. This is the noise I fought for. This is the chaos I chose. The quiet life, I've learned, was never about being alone. It was about having something, someone, worth being quiet for. This, right here, is the only success that has ever truly mattered. The world loves a loud man, a man who fills rooms with his voice, who wears his wealth like armor, who announces his presence long before he ever arrives. We're taught to equate volume with value, to see the flash of a gold watch as a sign of strength. For a long time, I believed that. I was that man. I was the roar in the boardroom, the architect of noise, the one who could make markets tremble with a single shouted command. I thought that was power. But I was wrong. True strength isn't in the noise you make. It's in the silence you keep. It's the quiet confidence of a man who knows exactly what he's capable of and feels no need to prove it to anyone. My worth wasn't in the fortune I'd built and lost, or in the deals I'd broken. My worth was in the peace I'd found in this small apartment, in the simple satisfaction of a job done well, in the quiet dignity of a life lived on my own terms, away from the roar. That silence was my fortress. It was the calm I had fought a war inside myself to win. And when they came for that peace, when they mistook my silence for emptiness, my calm for surrender, they made the most dangerous mistake a person can make. They mistook a quiet man for a weak one. A lion doesn't spend his days roaring. He doesn't need to. He lounges in the sun. He watches the world go by. He conserves his energy. He is a picture of stillness. The other animals might forget what he is. They might graze a little closer. They might even dare to challenge his space. They mistake his quiet for complacency. They forget the power coiled in that stillness, the instinct buried just beneath the surface. They forget the teeth. But the lion never forgets. He knows the precise moment to stop lounging. He knows the exact second his peace has been truly irrevocably threatened, and when he moves, It isn't with a warning roar. It's with a finality that is absolute. It is the one, single, devastating bite that ends the confrontation before it has even truly begun. The roar is for show. The bite is for keeps. I only needed to bite once. I didn't shout. I didn't threaten. I didn't make a scene. I simply reached into the quiet arsenal of my past and applied a pressure so precise, so surgically targeted, that it didn't just solve the problem, it erased it from existence. I didn't destroy them out of anger or for revenge. I did it to protect the one piece of my world that was truly, innocently good. I did it to reclaim my silence. And in doing so, I reminded them, and I reminded myself, of a fundamental truth. A man's worth is measured in the strength he reserves for when it truly matters. Not for petty squabbles, not for public displays, not for ego, but for the things that are sacred, for the people he loves, for the peace he has earned. That strength is a currency more valuable than any fortune, and it compounds in silence, growing more potent with every day it remains unused. So look at the quiet man in your life, the one who doesn't boast, who doesn't post his achievements online, who seems content with his simple corner of the world. Do not make the error of thinking he has nothing to lose. Do not assume his humility is a void. It is not. It is a deep, still well of power. He has chosen his quiet. And if you are foolish enough to threaten what he holds dear, you will force him to make another choice. You will meet the teeth. Remember that. I didn't wait for a reply. I didn't wait for the gasp, the plea, the anger. I pulled the phone from my ear and pressed the red button. The screen went dark. The silence in my kitchen rushed back in, but it was a different silence now. It was charged. It was the silence before the storm. The hinge on the cabinet was still loose, the screwdriver still in my hand. But nothing else was simple anymore. The ghost wasn't just at the door anymore. She was in the room. The silence in my apartment is a physical presence, a thick, comfortable blanket I wrap myself in every single day. It's not an empty silence, not the kind that echoes with loneliness. It's a chosen one. It's the sound of the old steam radiator hissing softly in the corner, the distant, rhythmic hum of the building's elevator, the faint scratch of my polishing cloth against worn leather. This is my peace. This is what I built after the storm. My home is 2 rooms on the 3rd floor of a pre-war brick building I superintend. It's modest, yes. The carpets are clean but not plush. The furniture is sturdy but not stylish. But it's mine. Every scuff on the floorboards, every chip in the paint on the window frame, I know them. They're honest. They're real. From my window I don't see a skyline of glittering towers. I see Mrs. Gable in the building across the way tending to her window boxes. I see Mr. Henderson walking his ancient terrier at the same time every afternoon. It's a life measured in small, predictable rituals, not in quarterly earnings reports or stock tickers. My job is simple. I fix leaky faucets. I replace burnt-out light bulbs in the common areas. I let in the plumber and supervise the exterminator. I listen to tenants complain about a drafty window or a noisy neighbor. There's a profound satisfaction in a problem that can be solved with a wrench and a few minutes of your time. You turn the valve, the dripping stops. You tighten the screw, the rattling ceases. The feedback is immediate, tangible. There's no ambiguity, no layers of deception to peel back. It's a clean kind of work. I set down the small brass hinge I was polishing for the main entrance door and picked up the old briefcase from the coffee table. It's the one possession from my old life I couldn't bring myself to discard. The leather is scarred and soft, the color of rich earth that's been darkened by rain and sun. It was a gift, a ridiculously expensive one, from a man I once considered a mentor. Back when I was still naive enough to believe in such things, I run the cloth over its surface, feeling the subtle grain, the faint impressions where my initials, AV, are stamped in faded gold leaf. This briefcase didn't carry lunches or novels. It carried futures. It carried the signed documents that would shutter a factory employing 500 people. It held the flash drives with financial models so complex they looked like abstract art, models designed to find the single hairline fracture in a company's foundation. With a few of those documents, with a few quiet phone calls from a secure line, I could make markets tremble. I was a ghost in the machine, a fixer. That's the polite term they used. A corporate strategist. It sounded so sterile. It wasn't. It was a form of warfare, conducted in boardrooms and over encrypted emails. I was very, very good at it. I could dismantle a fortune, a reputation, a life, with the same detached precision I now use to unclog a drain. My phone, a simple flip model, vibrates on the table next to me. A news alert glows on the screen. I don't even have to open it to know what it will say. The name of the company, Viridian Holdings, is enough. I'd seen the tremors weeks ago, recognized the specific terminal pattern of debt. I knew the exact moment the cascade would become irreversible. It was a house of cards. I'd watched being built from shaky foundations, and now it was falling. I felt nothing. No schadenfreude, no pity, just the cold, clinical acknowledgement of a predictable outcome. I closed the phone, silencing the alert, and went back to polishing the briefcase. That's the reason, the one I keep buried under this new life, under the quiet and the simple work. It wasn't the money, or the pressure, or the 80-hour weeks. It was the nothingness. The profound, chilling emptiness I felt after orchestrating a successful takedown. There was no victory, only a void. The thrill had curdled into a kind of soul sickness. I had become a weapon, and I no longer recognized the man holding the trigger. So I walked away. I left the tailored suits in the closet, the luxury car in the garage, the penthouse with its panoramic predatory view. I became Alexei, the superintendent. I traded power for peace. And most days, like today, with the sun warming the worn wood of my floor and the scent of lemon polish in the air, I can almost convince myself that the other man, the ghost with the briefcase, never existed at all. This is the calm. This is the life I built with my own 2 hands. And I will protect this quiet with everything I have left. The silence after I hung up on Anya lasted about as long as a snowflake in hell. My phone, this little black rectangle of glass and metal that I used for checking the weather and reading the news, became a weapon aimed directly at the quiet I had spent years building. It started subtly, a vibration against the wooden table where I drink my morning coffee. A text. Not from an unknown number, but from hers, the one I never deleted, a digital ghost I'd foolishly thought was finally at rest. Alexei, please. I know how that sounded. It's not for me. It's for an old friend, a matter of dignity. I read it once, then placed the phone face down. The steam from my coffee seemed less inviting. Now I could feel the old patterns trying to reassert themselves. The part of my brain that used to calculate angles and outcomes flickering to life against my will. An old friend. The phrase was a lie wrapped in sentimental paper. Everything with her was a transaction. Always had been. I'd just been too in love or too blind to see the price tag. An hour later, another vibration. He's a good man, like you used to be. That one landed like a punch to the gut, like you used to be. She knew. Of course she knew. It was a deliberate needle designed to provoke, to remind me of the man she'd left behind for the shimmering, empty success of Dmitri. I didn't respond. I got up, went about my duties as the super, unclogging a drain on the third floor. The simple physical work usually a balm to my thoughts. But today, the grease and the hair and the slow, satisfying swirl of water down the pipe couldn't drown out the buzzing in my pocket. The texts continued throughout the day. They shifted in tone, from pleading to passive-aggressive, then to a faux concern that was somehow worse. I'm worried about you, Alexei. Living in that little place, that job. Are you sure you're okay? Maybe this could help you too. Reconnect you with the world. Each message was a tiny crack in the dam of my peace. I'd find myself pausing while mopping the lobby floor, the mop handle in my hand, my mind 1,000 miles away, dissecting the subtext of her words. She wasn't just asking for money. She was trying to relitigate our past, to prove that her choice had been the correct one, and that my current life was a failure that needed her financial intervention to fix. Then, that evening, the phone rang. Not a text. A call. And it wasn't her number. It was Misha's. My heart, which had been a steady, if heavy, drum in my chest all day, did a painful little stutter. Misha. My boy. The one piece of that old life that never felt like a transaction. The one pure thing. I answered on the second ring. Misha? His voice was small, younger than his 16 years. Hey, Alexei. He never called me Dad. Dmitri had put a stop to that years ago, but he called every few weeks and we would talk about soccer, about his classes, about the music he was listening to. It was the one thread that connected me to that part of my soul. Is everything all right? I asked, though I already knew. The timing was no coincidence. There was a long pause, and I could hear him breathing, could almost see him, probably in his room, the door closed, phone pressed to his ear. I don't know. Mom and Dmitri, they're fighting a lot. About money. I closed my eyes, leaning against my kitchen counter. The formica felt cool against my palm. I'm sorry to hear that, son. He said, Dmitri said if things don't get better, we might have to move. Maybe before the school year is even over, leave my school, my friends. His voice cracked on the last word, and the sound was a physical pain in my chest. I have tryouts for the varsity team in the spring. I've been training all summer. This was Anya's masterstroke. She hadn't just sent a text. She had deployed the one weapon I had no defense against. She had weaponized my love for her son. She had taken his genuine fear and confusion and funneled it into a guilt-tripping narrative designed to break me. She knew I would hear the truth in his tremor, the real anxiety of a teenage boy facing the collapse of his world, and she knew I would blame Dmitri and her for putting that fear there. But she was also counting on that blame to translate into action, into money. I spoke to him for 10 more minutes, my voice calm, reassuring. I told him not to worry, that things have a way of working out, to focus on his training. I gave him the platitudes a father is supposed to give, all the while feeling like the worst kind of fraud. because I knew the source of the poison, and I had just refused to provide the antidote. When we hung up, the silence in my apartment was absolute and oppressive. The harassment had graduated from annoying to agonizing. My quiet evening, which I had planned to spend with a book, was ruined. The words on the page were just black marks. All I could see was Misha's worried face. All I could hear was the echo of his shaky voice. And then, 2 days later, the final invasion, I was coming back from taking out the trash, wearing my stained work coat, smelling of bleach and damp concrete. I pushed through the main glass doors into the lobby, and he was there, Dmitri. He looked out of place, a peacock in a sparrow's nest. His overcoat was too expensive, his shoes too shiny for the worn marble of my lobby. He was pacing, but it wasn't the nervous pacing of a worried man. It was the impatient, caged stride of someone who was used to people getting out of his way. He saw me and stopped, his eyes sweeping over me with a disdain that was so practiced it was almost impressive. "Alexei," he said, his voice echoing in the quiet space. "We need to talk." I didn't say anything. I just walked past him toward the door to the basement and my apartment. "This stubbornness of yours," he said, his voice rising, following me, "it's hurting the family. Your family." I stopped, my hand on the doorknob. I could feel the eyes of the building on me, the subtle shift in the air pressure that meant Mrs. Gable on the second floor had her door cracked open, listening. He had come to my home, to my place of work, to intimidate me, to perform his dominance in front of an audience he assumed would be impressed. I turned around slowly. "You are not my family," I said, my voice low and flat. He took a step closer, and I could smell his cologne, something sharp and aggressive. "Anya is. Misha is. Your refusal to help, to act like a man, is causing real problems in my home. Do you understand that? You are actively harming your son." The sheer, breathtaking audacity of it. This man, whose own house of cards was apparently trembling, had the gall to stand in my lobby and tell me that I was the one causing harm, that my inaction was the problem, not his actions. The peace I had fought for, the quiet life I had carved out with my own 2 hands, lay in shards around my feet. The texts were the warning tremors. Misha's call was the fissure cracking open, and Dmitri, standing in my lobby, dripping with contempt and desperation, was the earthquake that shattered it all. The calm was gone. All that was left was the ringing silence before the storm. The silence in my apartment had become a physical presence. It was the kind of quiet you could feel in your teeth, a low hum of nothingness that I had cultivated like a rare orchid. After Anya's call, after Dmitri's little performance in my lobby, I had retreated into it. I was polishing the old leather briefcase, the one from my other life, not because I needed it, but because the rhythmic motion was a meditation. It was a way to remind my hands what they used to do, while my mind stayed firmly in the present, in the quiet. My phone, sitting on the coffee table, was the intruder in this sanctuary. It had buzzed a few times with texts from Anya, pleading, then angry, then pleading again. I'd ignored them. The screen would light up, a brief, frantic pulse in the dim room, and then go dark. Each time, the silence would feel a little more fragile, a little more like a thin sheet of ice over deep, dark water. Then it buzzed again, but this time it wasn't a text. It was the shrill, old-fashioned ringtone I'd never bothered to change. I let it go to voicemail. A moment later, the notification chimed. I almost deleted it without listening. It would be Anya, her voice thick with fake tears, or maybe Dmitri, his arrogance barely masking the panic. I didn't have the energy for it. I picked up the soft cloth, ready to go back to the leather, back to the silence. But something made me pause. A prickle on the back of my neck, the same instinct that used to tell me a deal was about to go sour, or a counterparty was lying through their teeth. It was a ghost from a past I'd tried to bury, but it was never really dead. It was just sleeping. I put the cloth down. My fingers, usually so steady, felt clumsy as I tapped the screen to play the voicemail. There was a beat of empty air, the kind filled with the sound of someone trying to breathe and failing. Then, a sound that went through me like a shard of glass. It was Misha. His voice was so small, so compressed by fear that it was barely a whisper. It was the voice of a little boy hiding in a closet, not a teenager. "Alexei," he started, and then his breath hitched in a wet, ragged sob. The sound was a physical blow. I felt my own breath stop in my chest. They had a really big fight. Mom and Dmitri. He was yelling. He was throwing things. I could hear it in the background, the muffled chaos, the distant, angry thump of something heavy. My hand tightened around the phone. The polished wood of the coffee table, the soft lamplight, the quiet of my apartment. It all suddenly felt like a diorama, a fake little world, while the real one, the brutal one, was happening just a phone call away. "Some men came," Misha whispered, his voice trembling. They took the big TV from the living room and Dmitri's computer. They were just taking things. Mom is crying in her room. I'm in my room. I locked the door." He was 15 years old. He should have been worrying about video games or a math test, not locking his door against men repossessing his stepfather's life. The image of him, huddled on the other side of that flimsy wooden door, his world collapsing into noise and fear, ignited a cold, focused fire in the center of my being. I'm scared, Alexei," he said, and the simple, stark honesty of those 3 words was the final, decisive blow. It wasn't a performance. It wasn't a manipulation. It was the raw, unvarnished truth of a child caught in a storm he didn't create. The message ended with a soft click, followed by the automated voice telling me the message had been saved. I sat there for a long time, the phone still pressed to my ear, listening to the dial tone now, a flat, dead sound. The polished briefcase lay forgotten on the table. The silence in the room was no longer peaceful. It was the silence before the storm. It was heavy, charged, and waiting. For years I had told myself I left my old life to find peace, to escape the cold calculations, the ruthless efficiency, the part of me that could look at a human being and see only a set of assets, liabilities, and pressure points. I had buried that man under a mountain of quiet routines and simple satisfactions. I thought he was gone, but he wasn't. Misha's fear, the sheer, helpless terror in his voice, was the key that turned the lock. It was the click I'd been waiting for my whole life without knowing it. It wasn't a loud, dramatic sound. It was a soft, internal snap, like a safety catch being disengaged. The money was irrelevant. Anya's desperation, Dmitri's arrogance, they were just symptoms. The disease was the chaos they had created, a chaos that was now terrifying a boy I loved as my own, a boy who, in that moment of pure, childish fear, had reached out to the one person he thought could be a harbor. Me. And I would be. The quiet man was gone. The calm was gone. The peace I had fought so hard for was a luxury I could no longer afford. Something else was settling into its place, something older, sharper, and infinitely more dangerous. It filled the silence not with noise, but with purpose. The sleeping lion wasn't just stirring. He was awake, he was on his feet, and he was hungry. The key felt heavier than it should have, a cold brass weight in my palm. It was for the basement storage locker, number 47. I hadn't opened it in over 5 years. The air down there was always the same, damp, still, smelling of concrete dust and forgotten things. It was the perfect place for a ghost to sleep. I slid the key into the lock. The heavy clunk of the bolt retracting echoed in the silent corridor. I pulled the metal door open, its hinges groaning in protest. And there it was, right where I'd left it, pushed against the back wall. A heavy, olive-drab footlocker, the kind soldiers used. It wasn't full of old photo albums or Christmas decorations. It was a coffin for the man I used to be. I knelt, the cool concrete seeping through the knees of my work pants. Another key, smaller and more intricate, unlocked the footlocker. The lid was heavy. I lifted it, and the smell that wafted out was a time capsule in itself. The faint, sterile scent of ozone from old electronics, the dry paper smell of files, and the ghost of expensive leather from a briefcase I'd long since worn out. There were no mementos inside, no trophies, just tools. On top lay a stack of manila folders, their edges crisp. Beneath them, wrapped in a soft cloth, was an old, hardened plastic laptop, its shell a nondescript gray. Next to it, still in their original sealed plastic, were a handful of burner phones, their batteries dead but waiting. And tucked along the side, a small, black, leather-bound notebook. My little black book. Not of dates, but of contacts, names, numbers, codes, the nervous system of my former life. I lifted the laptop out, placing it carefully on the floor. I plugged in the proprietary charger, its light blinking from red to a steady, ominous amber. As it whirred to life, its fan humming a low, familiar tune, I picked up the notebook. My thumb traced the worn, gold-embossed initials on the cover, A.V. Alexei Volkov, a name that once made certain people in glass-walled offices break into a cold sweat. Sitting there on the cold floor, the past didn't flood back in a wave of nostalgia. It returned with the cold, methodical precision that had defined it. This wasn't about emotion, it was about process. I remembered the methodology. It was always the same, a 3-step dance performed in the shadows of balance sheets and stock tickers. First, you find the leverage. Every person, every company has a weak spot, a secret debt, a hidden addiction, an illicit affair, a fraudulent line in an annual report. You find the one thing they cannot afford to have exposed. You don't look for the big, obvious things. You look for the tiny hairline fracture. That's where you apply the pressure. Second, you identify the pressure points. It's never just one. It's a network. A primary creditor who is ruthless, a junior partner who is ambitious and greedy, a board member with a fragile ego, a journalist with a nose for blood in the water. You map the entire ecosystem of their life or their business, and you find all the points where a little push would cause the maximum amount of cascading failure. And third, You apply the force, not with a sledgehammer, not with a roar, with surgical precision. A single, anonymous email with a scanned document attached, a quiet tip to the right person at the wrong time, a nudge that sends a domino tipping into the next and the next. You don't get your hands dirty, you just arrange for the world to collapse on them all by itself. You are the architect of their ruin, but you're standing a mile away, watching through a telescope when the building falls. I wasn't a banker. I wasn't a strategist. Those were polite words for polite company. The truth was uglier and more accurate. I was a financial predator I hunted in the jungles of high finance, and my prey was the overconfident, the corrupt, and the weak. I was the man corporations hired when they wanted a rival not just beaten, but dismantled, erased. And now, Anya and Dmitri had woken that ghost. Not for money. They'd made this personal. They'd used Misha. They'd shattered the piece I had carved out with my own 2 hands, a piece that had cost me everything to build. They thought they were dealing with a simple superintendent, a quiet, broken man. They were wrong. My plan wasn't to give them a single ruble. Giving them money would just be a temporary patch on a sinking ship. It would make me an enabler. It would invite more pressure, more harassment. No. My plan was to expose the truth of Dmitri's situation so utterly, so completely, and so publicly that they would have no energy, no resources, and no will left to ever bother me or Misha again. I would burn their house of cards to the ground, and in doing so, I would rescue the boy trapped inside. The laptop screen glowed to life, prompting for a series of passwords and encryption keys. My fingers, which had grown accustomed to holding a wrench and a paintbrush, remembered the old patterns. They flew across the keyboard not with anger but with a cold, focused certainty. The ghost was awake. And he was hungry. The ghost was awake, and it was hungry. For 48 hours, I didn't sleep. I didn't eat anything that required more than 2 minutes to prepare. The quiet of my apartment was no longer peaceful. It was a command center. The tools from the footlocker were laid out on my kitchen table, a surgeon's array of forgotten instruments. The first step was the deepest dive, the one that required reaching into the past and pulling a thread. I powered up the old, encrypted laptop. The hum of its fan was a sound from another lifetime. I had 3 numbers, men I hadn't spoken to in over a decade. They weren't friends. They were assets. The first call was to a man I knew only as the archivist. He lived in a world of ones and zeros, a digital ghost who could find the financial soul of any man. The phone, a cheap, disposable burner, felt alien in my hand. I dialed the number from memory. It rang twice. "This line is supposed to be retired," a flat, synthesized voice said. No greeting, no pleasantries. "It was," I replied, my voice just as neutral. "The account was Sokol. I need a full financial vivisection. The target is Dmitry Volkov. His company is Volkov Holdings." There was a pause, the sound of fingers flying across a keyboard on the other end of the line. The so-called Titan of Timber? He's a public figure. This is simple. "I don't want the public figure," I said, my voice dropping to a whisper. "I want the man hiding in the sub-basement. I want the debts he's buried. I want the shell companies in Cyprus and the Caymans. I want the loans he took out against assets he doesn't own. I want every lie, every hidden zero, every fraudulent line item. Leave no stone unturned. I want the whole rotten truth." "Understood. The fee is triple for the short notice and the complexity." The fee is what it always was, I said, the steel returning to my voice. And you will be paid upon delivery, as always. You have 12 hours. I ended the call. The archivist was a professional. He wouldn't fail. The waiting was the hardest part. I spent the time reviewing old methodologies, the cold calculus of corporate destruction. It wasn't about brute force. It was about pressure. Find the weakest point in the structure and apply the precise amount of force to make the entire edifice groan. Dmitri was a braggart, a man who built his image on sand. His weakness would be his debt. Men like him always over-leverage, believing their own hype. 11 hours and 47 minutes later, a secure file appeared in a dead-drop server. I downloaded it, the data streaming onto the old laptop screen. It was a masterpiece of ruin. Dmitri's success was a house of cards so flimsy a strong wind would have toppled it eventually. I was just going to provide the hurricane. The documents detailed everything. Massive, hidden debts to a consortium of Lithuanian lenders, men not known for their patience. Fraudulent loans where he had used the same lumber shipments as collateral for 3 different banks, and the pièce de résistance. Systematic embezzlement from his own failing company, siphoning millions into a private account to maintain his lavish lifestyle while the business crumbled around him. He wasn't just failing, he was a criminal, desperately trying to outrun his own collapse. Step 2 began. Anonymity was my shield. I compiled 2 separate data packets. The first contained the evidence of the fraudulent loans and the embezzlement. This was for the journalist, Clara Menshikov. She wrote for a financial tabloid known for its ruthless sensationalist exposes. She was a piranha, and I was throwing blood into the water. I used a complex routing chain to send her the files with a simple one-line message. The Titan of timber is built on sawdust. Publish this. The second packet was for the Lithuanian creditors. This one was more direct. It contained only the evidence of Dmitri's debts to them and the proof he was actively hiding assets and diverting funds. I didn't need to write a message for them. The numbers were the message. They would understand the language of betrayal and lost money far better than any words I could compose. Finally, step 3. The coup de grâce. This required a voice, a single calm conversation. I dialed another number from memory. A man named Gregor answered on the first ring. His voice was a low rumble, the sound of gravel shifting. "Alexei," he said, no question in his tone. He always knew. "It has been a long time." "It has, Gregor. I have a whisper for you, an opportunity." "I am listening." "Volkov Holdings," I said, keeping my tone conversational as if discussing the weather. "The timber assets are fundamentally sound, but the corporate structure is compromised. The owner is distracted. There are significant liabilities that have recently become actionable. The stock is poised for a steep, rapid decline. A man with the right resources and a taste for hostile acquisitions could find the pieces very valuable once the dust settles." There was a long silence on the other end. I could almost hear the calculations whirring in his mind, the predatory instinct stirring. He wasn't a lender or a journalist. He was a scavenger, and I had just pointed him toward a dying animal. "Actionable liabilities," he repeated, tasting the words. "A steep decline. This is specific information, Alexei." "It is accurate information," I replied. "Do with it what you will." I ended the call. That was it. The 3 moves were made. The archivist had provided the blueprint. I had given the blueprint to the wrecking crew and the scavenger. Now all that was left to do was wait. I powered down the laptop, gathered the burner phones, and placed them back in the footlocker. I walked to my window and looked out at the quiet street the ghost had been fed. The machinery was in motion. There was no rage left in me, no satisfaction. There was only the cold, quiet certainty of physics. I had identified the structural flaw. I had applied the pressure. Now I would wait for the collapse. The phone vibrated on the kitchen counter, a frantic, skittering dance against the worn formica. I didn't need to look at the screen. I knew who it was. The timing was perfect. I let it ring 3 times, watching it spin, a little insect of panic trying to find its footing. On the 4th ring, I picked it up. I didn't say a word. The sound that came through the speaker wasn't a voice, not at first. It was a raw, guttural noise, a mix of a sob and a shriek, choked by what sounded like genuine physical pain. "Alexei," she finally managed, the name tearing itself from her throat. "Alexei, my God, what is happening?" I remained silent, my gaze fixed on the rain-streaked window of my apartment. The world outside was gray and orderly. A bus hissed to a stop. A man walked his dog. A normal Tuesday. "They're here," she screamed, her voice cracking. "The banks. They've frozen everything. The cards, the accounts, nothing works. There are men, Alexei, men in suits at the door right now, talking about assets and seizure. Dmitri's office. They're taking his company. They're taking it all. Everything is gone." I could hear the muffled shouting in the background. A man's voice, Dmitri's, roaring in impotent fury. I could picture the scene with perfect cinematic clarity. The expensive marble foyer, the art they bought to impress people, the grand staircase that now felt like a gallows. The facade was crumbling, and they were trapped inside the rubble. "Who did this?" she shrieked, the question a desperate, clawing thing. "Who would do this to us? You have to tell me. You have contacts. You know people from your old life. Who was it?" I let the silence stretch. I let it fill with the sound of her hyperventilating breaths, with the distant, beautiful music of their world falling apart. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my tea. It was still warm. When I finally spoke, my voice was flat, calm, devoid of any emotion she would recognize. No anger, no pity, no triumph. It was the voice of a man reading a technical manual. It was a tone I hadn't used in over a decade. A voice from a life I had buried. "It started with the bridge loans from the Cypriot Holding Company," I began, my words precise and measured. "The ones Dmitri used to prop up his quarterly reports. The ones secured by phantom assets. A very specific and very aggressive creditor was made aware of their fictional nature. They tend to move quickly." The line went utterly silent, save for a sharp, hiccuping intake of breath. "Then there was the matter of the embezzlement," I continued, as if discussing the weather. "The skimming from the employee pension fund to cover margin calls on his disastrous short positions in the shipping sector. A fascinatingly stupid gamble. That information found its way to a particular journalist. She has a Pulitzer for exposing exactly that kind of fraud. She was very grateful for the tip.